Ford Chinese tells a story of how a boy who comes from a different ethnic background than most of his peers overcomes pressure to fit in. Stereotypes, bias, and racism are major issues in this novel and they can cause feelings of loneliness, jealousy, and burnout. Many people, regardless of their ethnic background, generally experience similar feelings, and many of you are probably able to relate to these feelings. What, if anything, did you learn from this unit? You may reference examples from the novel, the article we read, Mean Girls, Dateline NBC, and the documentary about third graders in Iowa.
I learned from like the Dateline NBC show that like people recognize stereotypes, but they don't choose to like act on them and defend what they believe in.
I learned that jokes are really what keep like the stereotypes going. So like even though you don't mean it in a mean way or like in a way to create a stereotype, that's kind of the things that keep it around. And for example, like on Dateline, everyone would laugh just trying to play it off as a joke, but like you really knew that the people were actually being like stereotypical.
I almost feel like everyone's racist, but like they won't like no one will show it, but people like definitely separate themselves from like people that are different from them. Whether you like mean to or you don't, I just feel like it's just something that we're all like born with, and I feel like that's clear in Dateline. Everyone's able to be like pursued the one side, like to get rid of the Latino guy just because he wouldn't look good like on the cover of the singing whatever. So I don't know. I just feel like everyone's just born with that and it's just natural.
Yeah, I agree with Taylor about what he said, that everyone can be racist in some way. I actually said that everyone's racist to a certain extent, but like without actually realizing what they're saying. I know it happens to everyone, I'm pretty sure we've all done it sometime. And I can also refer to the Iowa experiment with the kids on how they didn't realize what was happening until they were explained.
On like Dateline NBC, I thought that the parents were really surprised that the kids like wouldn't stand up for themselves, and they're like, oh, since like it was called My Kid Would Never Do That, they thought that like their kid would like stand up for what they believe in, but none of them really did, besides that one guy like, at the end.
I thought it was interesting how like the documentary about the third graders, how like quick we are to stereotype. Like I thought it was especially interesting like the day after when like the people with brown eyes had like been hated on all day. They were so quick to hate on the people with blue eyes the day after, even though they know like what it felt like to be discriminated against. So I feel like everyone just kind of like takes their opportunity to be at the top and doesn't really like care about how it feels like to be at the bottom.
Oh, just kind of going off of that, I kind of found it shocking how people just felt like that they needed to do that almost just to make themselves feel better. Because I mean, the kids on the first day were just kind of like, oh, you know, I feel at the top, and then the next day the kids wanted to be again at the top, and no one really, like, not even one of them tried to mediate and try and say, no, this is wrong.
Yeah, going off of what Max and Sarah said, like, I feel like what I learned from, like, a lot of these things, like the Dateline NBC and the third graders and that experiment, that a lot of people just, I guess, try to put others down to feel better, and it really showed from, like, the experiments and just, like, the movies we watch and stuff, that it makes people feel better, so that's why they do it.
Yeah, like I thought it was especially interesting how like, I forgot if it was brown eyes or blue eyes, but someone's like, they got in a fight at recess because like, oh, he called me brown eyes. And how like if that would have happened 2 days before, that wouldn't have been like an insult. Like if I would call Gabby like brown hair, she would be like insulted by it.
Right in the face.
Yeah, exactly. Like, she would be insulted by it, but then if some way like it shows like, oh, blondes are better than brunettes, and then I called her that, then she'd be offended. So like it's just like the way that you phrase it makes it so it's way more offensive.
I said that, like, I knew that falling into peer pressure was easy, but I didn't understand it was that easy. Like when they were on the Dateline NBC, when they were like doing the singing competition, that like they just like made everything into a joke, and like they didn't even know that they were falling for the peer pressure they were.
I learned how much like people can be offended when they're discriminated against, because like they did those studies on the Iowa documentary, and like the kids scored less on tests that they usually would score better on when they were being in that discriminatory role. And then when Jin was gonna talk to Amelia again, he lost all confidence after after Greg told him not to on page 184.
Kind of like going off of what I guess Sarah and Taylor were saying, like, I think it's, people aren't necessarily trying to be racist, but people just like, it's like a natural thing to find the differences in things, and especially in people, and like, kind of what you were saying, Taylor, like categorizing them. I guess people just like categorize people by what's different from themselves, and like they would obviously think they are more superior than the other people with differences.
This is going off what Gabby said from Dateline. I learned that like racism isn't as big of a problem with the younger generations because of like all the diversity. But like standing up against peer pressure to do the right thing is.
So, next question.
How much time do we have?
Really 5 minutes.
Alrighty.
Anyone else say anything?
Oh, I did, but
Go ahead.
okay. I also said that like I learned that how like people like, especially in Mean Girls, like she like changed like who she was like just to fit in, so that could also go with like the Dateline. Like they like said they like went along with the jokes because they wanted to fit in and be cool.
Yeah.
Some things that I learned from this was like, I didn't really know that Asians had this stereotype of like having yellow skin, and they like showed that on page 48. So, and I learned different stereotypes, like obviously easy.
I thought like going off of Gabby, like the Mean Girls, I also thought it was like interesting how like when they're like going around the lunchroom and they're like saying like, oh these are like the jocks and the nerds and like the hipsters, like all that, like how that's like so like easily categorized in the movie, and how like it's not necessarily like that, or I personally don't think it's necessarily like that at our school especially, but like there still like is those little groups that you have, so I feel like even like when you're not forced into that setting of being like discriminated against or like grouped, like you naturally kind of group yourself with people like you, so I feel like that makes like racism and stereotyping kind of inevitable.
I agree, because like you kind of like subconsciously like do things and like notice things. So you learn that from like Dateline on NBC, that people just naturally just do that.
And kind of going off of what Peyton said, like, especially in American Born Chinese, like, it exaggerated like a lot of like little stereotypes that like a lot of people don't really either know about or heard, like the yellow skin or just like anything else. But American Born Chinese like brought up like just the little stereotypes and then exaggerated them to the full.
Going back to what Alex said about how the kids at work being discriminated, their test scores were lowered. What do you guys think that this happens?
You know, they look down on themselves, and I mean, if you're not like feeling good about yourself, like you're not gonna like perform as well. No, that's it.
Oh, okay. Well, I was gonna say that's kind of like the whole placebo effect kind of thing, where it's like if you give someone praise or something, or give them an incentive, normally they'll do better. But I don't really understand why they would almost do worse, because wouldn't you want to like try and strive and do better than the people who you think are better than you?
I don't know, I feel like they were set at such a low standard, and they felt like they were like told that they were stupid, and just that had a big effect on them, so I think that's why they did so bad on the test scores.
And the teacher was like always, like no matter what they did, the teacher would like put them down, so if they strived for something, they just expect to be put down again, so they just wouldn't, I guess.
She is registered.
Really?
Yeah, I just didn't have
Is there anyone else that hasn't talked yet?
registration, I just didn't get to
Is there anything?
I feel like people, when you bring them down, they're gonna do worse because they're not, like they don't feel good about themselves and they can't do better than people that they're saying that they're better than.
So I'll put her on, put in a bunch of information in, and then we'll get this.
Anyone else have anything to say? Or should I do the next question?
How much time is that?
We're at like 10, almost at 10.
Like a minute.
Do we stop it and then go